So, like, one, just really appreciate you being here. You've been such a mentor to me and, my business partner, Dave. And I've said this to anybody who will listen, our business, Sandlot, wouldn't exist without Brian Murphy. The earliest days, you've kind of always been a champion, and you've always believed in us and been willing to help, and not, help to get gain, but just to help to add value. And the more that I've been able to meet you and learn about you, and that's kind of been your life, is just adding value. And so I feel really kind of fortunate and honored to, call you a friend, and also to be able to, I know your story, but to be able to go deep and, share that story. And so we'll just jump right into it. You and Luis, you guys have 4 kids, 13 grandkids, just recently exited a company that you built for over 30 years. Still involved, but, not as involved as you were for most of those years. How'd you get here? Like, talk about, like, obviously, hopefully the best years are in front of you, not behind you. But there has been some great years behind you. And you're kind of getting into a season of your life where you can see some of the seasons have passed. It's, going to college, and then it's early being married, and then it's, paying your dues, and then building a business, and the maturation of that business over so many years. Where to start? Like, when you were 19 years old, was the vision to go create Portfolio Advisors and create this $40+ billion AUM company? Like, how did it go from, being a kid that had aspirations going to BYU to building what you built, both kind of personal and professional?
I think, like many people have experienced, the hard work and having goals are a critical part of it. But, you're lifted up on the shoulders of many people before you, whether they've taught you, whether they've held your hand and guided you, inspired you. I've always kind of come from the basis that I might be a little bit above average intelligence. I'm not going to outsmart most of the really good people out there, but I can outwork a lot of people. And if I combine smarts and hard work and networking and, just doing the best that I can and taking advantage of market conditions, but not taking advantage of people, that I'll be able to make it successful. And I think that's really what's happened. I was raised by terrific parents. They were very entrepreneurial. I was raised in New Jersey. I was born in Utah, but my parents moved to New Jersey when I was 3. And so I graduated from high school in New Jersey. And I was just always surrounded by people who believed in me and cared about me and encouraged me.
Did you come from kind of an affluent family? Was money and wealth something that you kind of lived with and kind of grew up with? Was that always kind of part of the game, or was it something that, wasn't?
My dad was a successful business executive, but he was never kind of the upper echelon where you were affluent. We were probably upper middle class. If we triggered anything above that, it would be very low on the upper class.
Yeah.
So we always lived in nice communities, but we had one of the smaller homes. Being from an LDS background, my parents tithed, and we had 5 kids in the family. And so we didn't fly on vacation. We drove.
Yeah.
And so every 3 years we would drive across the country, because my dad saved up enough vacation that we could spend a week getting out west, and we could spend a week or 2 in the west, and then a week getting home. And so, I'd say it was pretty, it was an educated and it was a professional, but it was middle class.
But remind me what he did professionally. He said he was a businessman.
So he was a PhD chemical engineer. And so he actually was, his first job was with Johnson & Johnson, and they helped invent the disposable diaper. So he was on the research team that kind of came up with the inner workings of that diaper so that it would, be absorbent and everything else. But he was a scientist. And so he worked for a variety of companies, PepsiCo. He was an international director of quality control for all the Pepsi in the world. And, but again, it wasn't one of those where you had big stock options and he was making millions of dollars. That wasn't,
which is kind of a generational thing. That stuff wasn't the same.
The big money today isn't just like the professional athletes. I mean, a really great contract was $250,000 when I was a kid. So we never went for want. We, always went to public school. We never went to private school. My parents just wanted us to be good people, good citizens, build something. And my dad always encouraged me to own equity. He wanted me to be the owner. He wanted me to be the founder. And so that was always in the back of my mind.
But was he an owner? Or like, where did he get that insight?
He had patents, and because he never had big stock option packages, he figured, okay, at some point I'm going to start my own business. And so he ran a very successful consulting business in the latter part of his career, helped him to found a manufacturing business. He was called to serve as a mission president. And the part that was so impressive to me, here I am in grad school, is that my dad, in order to serve a mission, had to shut down his consulting company effectively because all the contracts were based on his expertise. He did figure out that he might be able to sell it, but as soon as he left the country, the buyer stopped paying him. And so he effectively shut it down.
Yeah.
And so when he got back, I think I calculated with my dad, his net worth when he came home was less than $400,000. And yet he had had a very successful life and a very successful career, but monetarily you would never see that. And I think part of it was that he always gave generously. He always supported causes that he believed in, and money wasn't that important to him. Taking care of his family was important, but money itself and the accumulation of wealth wasn't.
That's so interesting because it feels contradictory. It feels where he's saying, hey, you need to have ownership, and he's kind of teaching you these lessons of ownership where, if you talk about your net worth, it's not $400,000. Like you've taken those principles and applied them to business and literal ownership and been able to grow, hundreds of billions of equity value over the course of, 35 or 40 years of portfolio and portfolio advisors. And when you go back and you say, hey, I'm, intelligence, like you're one of the smartest guys I've ever met. Like, so it's not like your family.
My kids beg to differ.
No, it's like my partner Dave and myself were just like, Brian's the GOAT. We go sit down with Brian and he's forgot more about everything that we're doing than we'll ever learn. Like it feels like it's natural to you, but obviously your dad was super influential in that and in your thinking and in your track. And he was an entrepreneur.
How do you live a quality life? And they were wonderful examples of that. I tell people I've never heard my mom say anything negative about anyone. It was just stay in your lane, work hard, be a good example, keep the commandments, and you'll have a good life. And money was secondary in that process. For me, because I was very interested in finance, I got an undergrad degree in business from BYU, and then I went back to New York and got my master's from Columbia. Money was just a little bit more important to me than it was to my parents, but they kind of built those core principles and values. And, one of the core things in the family was if you have more than you need, then give it away. Don't hoard, give it away. And so from the earliest days, I married a wonderful woman who felt the same way. And so Louise and I have always said, if we have more than we need, we'll save some just to make sure we have the rainy day fund there so that we're able to take care of our family. But we don't need to accumulate a vast sum. And so, let's try to serve others. How do we help build others and help their lives? Because we've always felt blessed. We've always felt that we have had a surplus.
But and this is, money is like the most intriguing topic to me, because it's a trigger for so many people. People think of money very, very differently. And so I love diving into the examples of people that see money as a good thing, see money as a tool of production, see money as an ability to do more good in the world, and that's
a motivator.
Yep. And that's been you. When I look at your dad, when I look at yourself, and maybe it's just, it feels like what you're building from a giving standpoint has sustainability to go on for a long time.
That's the hope.
It's not something that you give it away and it's gone. It's kind of a machine that keeps creating money to be given away. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about that? Is it, when you say when it's all said and done, is it to die with zero? Or is it to kind of leave an endowment that keeps working far after, you're here?
It's a great question. We've encouraged our kids, even when they're newlyweds and they're just starting to look for ways that they can give back, because I think it's habitual and you want that to be an important part of your life. And some of our most choice memories were when we were doing things for others and we were helping others. And we want them to experience the same feelings and the same sense of accomplishment in their own lives. And so we've done a lot together as a family. And so we've tried to build into our family culture what my parents built into theirs. I always felt like because my parents weren't wealthy that I didn't have a safety net under me. And so I think the accumulation of wealth can be very motivating positively, but it can also be very motivating negatively. I mean, we read about people all the time who have such a desire to create wealth that they do illegal things and they just do things the wrong way because whether they're shortcuts or there's just easier ways to do it. And so, our goal was how do we live a good life? And how do we do it in an honorable way that you can go to bed every night saying, today was a good day. I accomplished all of my life objectives. And over time, it does start to build. And so as a family, we've set it up so that our kids are taken care of. We paid for all of our kids' education so they didn't come out with massive school debts. And so we just said, look, you need to build your own life and we can be helpful and we can provide a safety net so you can take measured risks. But the vast majority of what we have, we're giving away to charity, and we're going to give to people who just haven't had the same blessings and opportunities that you've had. And so we did recently establish a foundation, but we didn't need a foundation to give money away.
Yeah,
I think one of the kind of big lines that happened in our life, and I think it's when my job turned from a job and a career into a stewardship, was when we realized, okay, we've now saved enough that we can, if we're smart, live on our investment income.
Yeah.
And so let's pledge personally to ourselves that we will give away 100% of our salary for the rest of our career. And that trigger point happened during the global financial crisis when we saw so many people in need, people that hadn't made bad decisions, that just factors came in that just crushed them.
Yep.
And if you're in certain industries and the global financial crisis hits, you got in trouble. There are a lot of people lost their jobs. And, we live back in Connecticut. It was a very expensive place. If you have a $10,000 mortgage, a $20,000 mortgage, you need a very big bank account to take care of your family.
Those were the jobs that got smashed. I mean, There were the finance jobs. There were the white collar jobs. There were the ones, the Lehman Brothers, the Bear Stearns, and kind of all of the ripples that came from that just kind of shook everything.
It did. And we knew hundreds of people that had lost their jobs. And you kind of look at it, and we happened to be in an investment space where we had some contrarian strategies and our business grew, and we had our record year that year. And so, there's a little bit of guilt.
So you guys were experiencing kind of some of the biggest years of your life when the world was melting down.
Yeah. Our business was growing. We had raised capital. We raised over $1 billion for a fund that would buy distressed assets, basically provide liquidity for people that needed to get out of illiquid investments. Yeah. And so, it's just a matter of kind of looking in the mirror and looking at your spouse and saying, do we have an obligation here? We see pain and suffering. There's some that we can alleviate. We don't have enough money to alleviate it all, but what can we do? And so it was really fun. We would identify people that might not be able to pay their electric bill or their gas bill, and we would go and anonymously pay that. Or we knew someone's car was going to be foreclosed on and they needed it to get to work. And so we went ahead and made car payments to try to get them trued up. And we made some mortgage payments and we paid some apartment rents and just tried to do things behind the scenes that would make a difference. And, the kind of thing that you would hope someone might do for you or someone that you love if they found themselves in the same situation. And I mean, I had a dear friend, and his mother had always been kind to me. And I learned that she was destitute, that she was renting a room from a stranger, And she basically lived 24/7 in that room and ate, kind of pre-packed food. But she only got like $570 from the government, and she had to spend $500 for rent. So she had no money to do anything. And yet the family just wasn't in a position to help her. And she had, just a couple of kids. And so my wife and I said, geez, this is wrong. This should not be the case. And so we volunteered to pay her rent and to make sure that now she went from $70 of disposable income to $570. And she was able to then take care of herself with dignity. And I think we paid her rent for 8 years. We just said, we can afford to do this forever. And it wasn't until she went into a government paid for nursing home that we ended up stopping doing that. But people said, why would you do that? It's not even your family. I said, she's family. So if that happened to my mom, that's what I'd want someone to do for her.
Yeah.
So
let's go back to the beginning. So you graduate from high school, you go to BYU. Talk about those years and kind of how they shaped you and who shaped you. Like who were, your dad's a chemical engineer. He's a PhD. That's a way different route than I'm going to go into finance. Like what were the kind of seeds that pushed you into that area?
Well, my dad had the goal that every one of his children graduate with an engineering degree. None of us graduated with an engineering degree. So in some small way, I'm sure we let them down. But they always asked really good questions. They wanted us to apply ourselves. They knew that we could do well. I remember I took an inorganic chemistry class, and it was the hardest class I took in college. I scored in the top 4% of chemistry students in high school, so I thought this will be a breeze.
You do well, yeah.
It was not a breeze. It was really hard. And so I think I got a C on my midterm, and I came home for Christmas, and my dad's like, so how'd you do? And I said, I did really, really well. I got, pretty much all A's in all my classes. But this one class, teacher's tough, TA's tough, material's tough. It's PhD level stuff. I mean, it's advanced since where you went to school. And he said, well, so you didn't do well on your final? I said, no. I said, I studied. So you should have studied more. And I said, I studied. And he said, you should have studied more. And I said, all right, smart guy. I brought a blank test home. You take it. Let's see if you can even score what I scored. And he said, all right. And I think we had 3 hours to take the final. And he finished it in 20 minutes, and he got 100. I'm like, oh, man, that was not what I was trying to prove here. And he said, you need to study more.
That's like a dad. That's like a dad flex right there. It's just like.
But so they had the same goals that we have for our kids. My kids are growing up with more affluence than I grew up with, but you want them to feel the satisfaction of winning in their life. Whether it's you're going to be the best school teacher ever, or you're going to be the best fireman, or you're going to be the best finance person, whatever it is you choose to do, we want you to have that sense of accomplishment that you are an expert. And they have a little bit more choice than I did, or I thought that I did, in picking careers, because they do have some resources. I just felt like I have an obligation to my wife and family. No one can bail me out if I make a mistake. I have to be super conservative. And when I do become aggressive, I just have to have a plan in place that I've got protection. And so I wanted them to have that opportunity. And yet they, none of them are going to live like first class. They don't fly on private jets. They get to make their own way meaningfully in life, and they'll feel that satisfaction, and it'll work out well.
So this is like a topic that I'm studying a lot right now, trying to, tap into the people that are 10 and 20 years in front of me. We have young kids. We got 5 kids. The youngest is 2. Oldest is 15. And, we've made money for a long time. We've made money, for as long as I can remember. And so the way I have grown up and my kids grew up is just different than the way I grew up personally. And I see it screw up a lot of families. But then I also see examples of people that have been able to create systems and structures. And that's something that, one, I've been intrigued with how you've structured it. And also like that philosophy, it feels like you've built something that allows you to participate in your kids' journey and add value when they want you to add value, but you're not like slamming it down their throat. Can you talk a little bit about the Murphy Bank and kind of the legacy and trust structure and how you've thought through it and built it, because it's really innovative. Out of anybody who I've talked to, it's something that I'm just like, man, how fun would that be to be able to be a part of your kid's journey and that those decisions that they're making, but also like not doing it for them. It's there for them. It's a resource, but it's not. I'll talk a little bit about kind of that. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but that's
sure. It's interesting. My dad was notorious for giving a lot of unsolicited advice. And so my wife and I have tried to be a little bit more measured in that so that we wouldn't develop the same reputation. But we've always told our kids, look, we've experienced a lot of things in life, and it might make sense to pick up the phone and ask our opinion so that you don't experience some of the same failures that we did, because you learn a lot from failure. But learn from other people's positives and negatives so that you can navigate life a little bit better, a little bit cheaper. The pain's not as great. And my kids, I have really great kids, and we have a really good relationship. And so they do call and they text and they email and they say, hey, I'm looking at this insurance I need to do, or this or that. And you just kind of give them the best counsel you can. And if you can't, then many times you can point them to someone that is an expert that could be helpful. And so one of the things that we've done is we said, well, let's take part of our resources and make them available through a loan to our children and say, look, this is not cheap. This is 10% money. If you're making an investment and it's illiquid, you need to make sure that the rewards are appropriate for the risks that you're taking. So let's think through what you plan on doing, and does this make sense? Because if you can justify the investment based on 10% cost of capital, then you probably could bring in outside investors and you could do things in a way that you can scale it. If you can't justify it, then the question is why? And my wife reminds me many times, everything doesn't have to make money. Some things you do just out of sheer joy, some things you do because it's a hobby. Everything doesn't have to make money. And she's completely right. I have just, because of my career, I just think that way, that everything needs to justify its cause.
That's the scorecard for you. And that's been your profession your whole life. And the scorecard is, what is the IRR? What is the MOIC?
Well, sometimes I can't avoid it, right? And so I had someone call and offered me like 4 times my money on this property that we own down in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. And my wife just kind of points her finger at me and she said, don't you dare sell that just so you can tell your friends you made 4 times your money, because I'm going to make you turn around and buy another one and it might cost you 6 times your money. And she's right. Sometimes we get too absorbed in the process and we don't think about the outcome.
But it's a game, and it's actually a pretty fun game with like a scorecard.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
So we go back to kind of the trust and the bank and kind of how, give some examples of like your kids using it, a specific deal they've done, how they've used it.
Some of my sons have invested directly in Sandlot deals. And they've said, I really like this deal. I believe that the financials that have been put together will cause it to have an appropriate return. I think I'll have a spread over the 10% cost of money. Can I invest in this deal? And said, I agree with you. I'm going to invest myself in this deal. And so this looks like this would be accretive to your net worth. And so I will lend them that money to make sure that they can participate. They throw in some of their own, but if they're going to get any scale, then they need a little bit of help. But that's how I built my business. We raised, $25 billion for our funds, and we manage over $40 billion. It's not all our money. It's not the partners' money. We have people that are entrusting us because they think that we can do well with their money and that they will end up in a better position with a good return.
But you've always had skin in the game. Like from the day you started your business, you've always had your own money. In the deals you've done.
We raised our very first fund, and it was just before the tech wreck of 1990. And I told my wife, I said, this is our first fund. It's really important that we have skin in the game, and that if we're going out to friends and family to top it off after we have the institutional investors, they need to know that I will be focused on this completely and that we're going to do everything we can to make it a winner. Can't guarantee that it's going to be a winner, but that it's going to hurt if it's not a winner. And she said, I understand. I said, so I've just put our small retirement account that we've been building at our first job, 100% of it just went into this fund. And she said, okay. So what if we lose all the money? I said, well, I don't believe we'll lose all the money, but if we lose all of our money, then we will be living in a trailer in Mississippi. And she says, oh my gosh, that's a horrible outcome. So I understand if we're broke, why we live in a trailer. Why in Mississippi? I said, because we're going to be hiding from all of our friends, because we have 20 or 30 friends that participated alongside us in this fund, and they're all going to be really angry. And she said, well, you better not lose any money then. You better do everything you can to make this work. And so alignment matters.
Yeah.
Being aligned is a big deal. And the market crashed. Tech stocks went down 85 to 95%. People lost a ton of money, but we ended up making money in that fund. And, we had like an 18% return on our bio portfolio. I think we only did like 6 or 7 on the venture portfolio, but I went and apologized to one of my biggest investors. He goes, you don't need to apologize. I lost 85% of my money on the other deal I did same time as you, and you doubled my money. It took a long time, but you doubled it. So we had good outcomes, and that was important. But boy, I watched it very carefully because we were all in.
Yeah. So how do you reconcile what you said earlier, which is very conservative, need to make conservative choices, don't have a nest egg, with I'm taking my full retirement and I'm betting on myself?
I realized it was a whopping $100,000.
But at that,
but it was all of it.
But at that point, it was everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think it's like,
I think it's okay to bet on yourself. And many of my friends have said their very best investments were when they bet on themselves or when they were an expert in the area that they invested in. Where people tend to do poorly is if they have zero idea how any of it works and they're just tossing in their money because they know people that are doing it. I believe in my capabilities. Sometimes we probably have more confidence in our capabilities than we should, and sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit. I was 30 when I started my first investment firm, and people say, well, how did you do that?
So you were young, but not that young. I mean, you'd had some reps.
I had worked as an investment banker. I had taken over the restructuring of a private equity portfolio. I had a really good fundamental understanding of what was going on. And I was able to convince one of my investment banking clients to back me in my first investment management business. And, it was a little naive. You're 30 years old. It's one thing to be able to execute. It's another thing to have credibility to go out and raise money.
Yeah, for sure.
And so what really helped me was that client believed, and they gave me a big separate account, and we did well for them. And so they continued to be a very loyal customer.
They were one of your biggest champions.
Yes, early on. And they had a woman who became a very good friend who was ultimately in charge of that whole area. And she backed me twice. And she said, you've worked so hard, you've done so well for us. I'm willing to take this risk because I think
what do you think made her and that company believe in you more than you believed in yourself? Like, what was it? Just you worked hard for them? Was it the way that you showed up? Was it,
I think
the results?
It was a combination. I actually took an apartment in the Midwest for 2 years so that I could be there 4 and 5 days a week and really make sure that this worked.
So you were commuting.
Yeah. And I was gone from home a lot. And my wife had a big responsibility because of that. So they knew that we were doing everything within our power to make things right. And we started to have a series of very good outcomes, and they could tell that we were making good decisions and that we were doing what they had wanted us and hoped that we would do. And they said, okay, we now have enough credibility with them and track record with them that they're willing to entrust us with more resources. And that was a game changer. When we started Portfolio Advisors when I was 35 years old, they came across as one of our first large clients. Wow. And they gave us $1 billion of fresh capital. So it was kind of almost a fairy tale ending, but I owe it to them and their willingness to be open-minded and to believe. Yeah. And, it was a great outcome.
Now, so this is kind of going to lead to a different topic, but it fascinates me just because I've had these leaders in my life. When I think about where I'm at today in life, I can think of like 3 to 5 people that I'm like, I would not be where I'm at without that person. that person believed in me more than I believed in myself at a moment in time where I could have taken a lot of different roles or a lot of different roads.
Right.
When you think back about kind of like those people, who are those people? Like, think about names. Who's the person that believed in Brian Murphy more than you? Obviously, like self-confidence. It feels like you've always been confident. You've always kind of had this, drive and this work ethic, but also like there's just degrees of that. Sure. You're not where you were at today when you're 22 or 23 or 24. There's all of us have like these self-limiting beliefs and these imposter syndrome of, I'm outside of where I should be or whatever. Like, who was the leader or the leaders that looked at you and just said, Brian, you're going to be a star. I believe in you. Or,
without calling anyone out specifically, other than my wife, she's always been a believer. I remember once we were probably married for 15 years by then. And I said, you don't seem to be concerned for 1 second of the day about how much money we have. And she's not a spendthrift. And so it wasn't an argument that you're spending all of our money. It was just, why is that? You and I seem to feel wealth is different for each other. And for me, it is safety. For me, it's a scorecard. For you, it's a given. You just don't worry about it. Why is that? He said, it's pretty easy. I have complete confidence that you will be able to take care of our family, regardless of the situation. You will work 22 hours a day if you have to, but we will never go without. And that's big.
I don't know if you get like a better compliment.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said, wow, that was what I was expecting, but what a wonderful compliment.
Yeah.
So having that cheerleader in your court and helping to just kind of, you can do that. Go do that. That you've thought through that. That's a reasonable risk. Take that risk. That was huge. My parents were cheerleaders. I had good coaches growing up. I think
talk about coaches. I know for me, I had a high school football coach that just kind of changed my life. I was just like, the way that they pushed me to be my best.
Yeah.
But
right.
also like put me in a role.
It's like working out with a partner, right? I always get a better workout if I work out with someone else than if I do it on my own. Because you have encouragement, you're watching what they're doing, you're looking at what weights they're lifting, all those kind of things. And the coaches that were really good got out of you more than you were likely to have gotten out of yourself. I know people that are great at working out on their own, and they just somehow can extract the very best. I needed a coach to do that. And so you get mentors in life. You get mentors in your career that you watch and that you want to emulate. I mean, I was very fortunate where we lived. You had people like Dave Checketts and Gary Crittenden and Rod Hawes and others that just seemed to be a wonderful example of blending success, capability, family, church leadership, and how do you juggle it all?
Those guys were
all
LDS.
They were all LDS. They were all lived within 10 miles of me.
East Coast, and very successful in kind of their different businesses.
Many different industries.
Yeah.
And I always looked to that, because, you go through hard times, you go through scary times, and you want positive role models. And how do you do it? Because sometimes you feel like I can't juggle it all. It's just impossible. But you see other people juggling. Now, when you get to be friends with them and you talk to them, you realize, like the duck that's swimming, their legs are going a lot faster under the water than it looks like, that it wasn't easy for them, that they were going through the same thing that you were going through in order to keep it.
But it looked easy. From the outside, you're looking at them saying they have it all figured out.
But it is possible. And that's kind of the role models that you wanted. And the other thing is that I was just very, very fortunate that I had terrific partners. I mean, these are people of faith and people of hard work ethic, and they were moral and they were also driven, but only driven to the point they would do it in the right way. And so I was always grateful for them. We could sit down and we could confide in each other and we could count on each other. You can't build a big business all on your own. You need to surround yourself with capable people. And I think Portfolio Advisors, before our merger, we had just under 150 people. All of them played a role. No one's not important. And so, we wanted to make sure that everyone won. That was always kind of one of my big things, is that I want to build a business where everybody wins. And, my office manager retired, and she made over $2 million from owning stock in the company. And so that was a great outcome for her. And so it's just, it wasn't about how do I get the most? How do I build something great so that lots of people win, knowing that I'm going to do just fine if I can accomplish the big goal? And that's what happened. And, with our merger, we basically merged with people who were also really high caliber and had a really good culture and believed in what they were doing and believed in us. And it was like, okay, this is just an expansion of what we've been, and now we're going to be on a bigger platform. But these are people that I have confidence in and that I can trust because they're just good, capable people.
Yeah. It feels like from the earliest days with your dad to kind of being newly married, marrying the right girl, marrying Louise that believed in you and it was just down to sacrifice. Like the common where we haven't got into that I think we could take, the entire time that we talk is work ethic. And that's just been something that like you've just outworked everybody else, and I think when you look at the hours that you've spent on planes,
it might have been lack of creativity. I didn't know any other way to do it. I've told people the pandemic was the best 2 years of my career because it forced me to step back and say, what I did worked, but is there a better way to do it?
Yeah.
And so, I've calculated that I've flown around the world almost 250 times. I've flown 6 million miles. I've given thousands and thousands of presentations, and it worked. And that's what I believed had to be done for it to work. But then when we had the pandemic, we raised over $5 billion by Zoom. Now, you couldn't have done it as a startup, but because we were big enough and we had enough relationships and enough repeat investors, the business was able to grow during the pandemic.
I think, being the, contrarian, everybody raised money through the pandemic. Like there was just liquidity that came into the market.
Not everybody, but yeah, people. There were far fewer failures than you would have expected in our space.
You'd expect it to be a time of crisis, and it just wasn't. Exactly. It was actually kind of a time of.
The government was kind of helpful with that.
Yeah, they turbocharged it.
But on an institutional basis, what really saved us was that the stock market dropped and then it ran. And in our world, liquidity is what drives reinvestment. And so if institutions have a growing AUM in their pension fund, then they have more money they can then dedicate to illiquids. And so, it ended up what could have been a terrifying time. Ended up being a confluence of multiple events, and it became a very good time for certain industries and a very negative time for others. We happen to be in the winter camp.
But I go back to the beginning, and I'm like, you take this kind of thesis, this 10,000 hour rule, this idea that you can never be the best at everything. But there are a couple of things that you can be world class at. And to do that, it's going to take 10,000 plus hours of deliberate practice. And you take that and you plug it into your career. You put in those hours. Like you didn't cut.
And I was not a good salesman when I started off. I was actually a relatively shy person.
That sounds like so hard for me to believe.
Well, that's what my family gets it because I just wasn't super social. I've always had a small group of very close friends. I have a lot of acquaintances and a lot of friends, but not those deepest friends that you can kind of share any thought with.
Yeah.
And so when I got out of college, it was like, geez, I don't want to be a salesman. I just learned you can't be an entrepreneur if you're not a salesman.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of had to learn to do it and say, I want it bad enough that I can conquer my fears. And I had some very good coaching early on. You have a placement agent that's helping you raise a fund, and they would just rip apart my presentation afterwards and say, you said I'm 17 times. You used the word crossed. There's no T in cross. They would just get into the very great details, and they made me better. They just hammered me and hammered me and hammered me until you got to the point where you could just explain to people the concepts in a way that they could completely understand them, know that you understand it, know that you believe it, and that they can trust you.
Wow.
And as a result, you could take some pretty complex things and just have a very good meeting, presentation, conversation, and increase your win rate. And I think that's been one of the things that I got good at was how do I explain to people in a way, which is sales, such that they're motivated to take action and that they just trust us. And I had some clients that helped me along the way. I had one client that I pitched, and they made the decision right there, and they hired me and my firm. And I asked the treasurer, I said, "Why did you hire me?" He said, "Well, first of all, we called one of our trusted advisors, and they said you should have portfolio advisors and Brian come in and talk to you. We didn't interview anyone else, so we didn't hire anyone else. You were exactly what they told us, and we trust you. So let's do this." And I thought, okay, that's pretty compelling and that's important. So how do I make sure that I try to work that way with others? And we've tried to be as fair as we can with our clients. We don't want them to think that these are transactional relationships. These are long-standing relationships, and that if we step up and we do hard things for our clients, that they will appreciate that. And most of our clients are relationship-based. Every once in a while you run into someone that's transactional and, they go for the shiniest penny. But we built a great business because we truly had world-class clients, and we just kind of bonded.
Yeah. Everybody sees kind of the successes at this point. They see, the business working great. They see, the family. They see kind of your impact in the community. Talk about the failures and how they shaped you along the way. Like, it's easy for people to see the highlights. Talk about the ones that went wrong. Like, what are the times in your life where it didn't go as planned, and kind of how that shaped you? I've talked to so many people that say, success isn't what makes you great. Success isn't what teaches you. It's your failures. It's when you screw stuff up that you learn a lot more. Talk about those. Like, do you have any that stick out that you just say, man, this was so hard, but it was exactly what I needed?
A couple, I guess. One, when you're really committed to something, sometimes you throw too much energy into that to the damage of things around you. When I got my job as an investment banker, I was so grateful because I went to school in 87 and 88, and Black Monday happened.
No, it was a hard
in my
time.
Second year of grad school, and most of the investment banks canceled all of their job offers. I was one of the few that kept mine because I had taken an offer from a smaller firm at the time, and they didn't have any muscle to cut. They didn't have any fat to cut. And so, out of, probably less than 10% of my entire MBA class kept their job offers. And all of them had offers, but they all got canceled with Black Monday hitting in October of 88, I think. Yep. And so I was really grateful that I had that because it allowed me to pursue what I really thought. But, to do that, you get up at 5:36 in the morning, you catch the 6:30 train, you're working on all these assignments. Many times you get to go on the 8:30 or 9:30 train, you get home at 10:30, 11. But it was kind of mandatory. If you didn't do that, you were going to get phased out.
That was plain stakes at that point in your career.
But that's really tough on a young family. My wife decided she was going to keep the little kids up till midnight so that I could actually see them when I got home, and then she'd let them sleep till 11 or 12 o'clock the next day.
Which I think about like where I'm at right now, and we're trying to get our kids in bed by like 6,
right?
5 o'clock,
right. And so I would have never seen my children for 5 years if that was the case. And she just said, we're just going to time shift this thing. We're going to fit it into our family. But there was no time to exercise unless you got up at 3 a.m. I wasn't quite that dedicated. And you're working hard, and they feed you lunch and dinner. And I ballooned up to 309 pounds.
Wow. So you got big.
I got big.
At a young age.
I was a lineman size for the New York Giants. And, I'm 6'3", but 309 is big.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where I had always been athletic. I had always been in shape. I was a wrestler, so weight mattered. And I just got so focused on work, that completely went out the window. And that was bad. I mean, you can have some really bad health consequences if you keep that weight on long term. So that was one failure. And so it took me many years to get my arms around that and to figure out how to.
Was there a rock bottom point? Was there like a point where you're like, no more, I'm just not doing this anymore? Like,
so the rock bottom point didn't come as soon as it should have. But one of the very funny things that was a motivator was I started to travel to Japan frequently. And the first time I went, my translator was introducing me to these Japanese businessmen, and they were all laughing and slapping me on the back. And I'm thinking, I wonder what he's saying. I don't understand him. And that night I said, so how are you introducing me? And he said, oh, well, there's a famous Bulgarian sumo wrestler, and he's been kind of taking over sumo in Japan. And so everybody knows him. And I was introducing you as a Bulgarian sumo wrestler.
oh my gosh.
I'm thinking, yeah, clearly I've gotten too big. And so I started working on it. But about 5 years later, I was by myself, and a man recognized me in the hotel I was staying at. And came up and wished me all the best in my upcoming sumo tournament. And, and so I thought, all right, I got to get more aggressive at this, and I got to shrink meaningfully. And so I have. But
you look great, by the way.
Thank you. I feel better too. But I think those are the things, when you think about life balance, you can really blow some things up. I traveled many years, a minimum of 3 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week. Sometimes I was gone on weekends because if you had to fly to Hong Kong or Singapore, you left on Saturday morning.
Yep.
And so it really was a tag team with my wife on how do we get everything done? How do we take care of all of the family needs? And I'm certain, just given the responsibilities and the way that I built my business, that I did not spend as much time as I should have. And my wife had to make up for all of it. So when everyone says you have a wonderful family, you have wonderful kids, my wife gets 90% of that credit. And she was the rock. She chose to stay home. She could have had a very successful career. And we just kind of had to divide and conquer and say, you have your specialty, I have mine. But, if it got too bad, she'd raise her hand and say, all right,
it's too much.
You got to figure this one out. And so I worked really hard to be home for the kids' big events. And I've encouraged my children not to follow my career path. Be home more, coach your kids, have dinner with your family. We can figure this out. There are ways to have successful careers without working 80 hours a week. So,
could you have had the career you had without taking that road?
Maybe. I think maybe I cheated. I went to the highest likely outcome, and I knew that the highest likely outcome was if I put in the 80 hours, if I got on the airplane constantly. And that was probably just based on my fears and insecurities. Yeah. But it worked. It's worked well for my family, but at the same time, I don't necessarily recommend it for everybody else.
But I think that's a real thing. Like, I was talking to my wife the other day, and, I'm like, you don't understand. I think about money and taking care of our family and providing kind of all day, every day.
Right.
It's that there's never a time where it's not on my mind. And I think, like, if you make that choice that you're going to provide and your wife, is going to raise the kids, it's all on you. Like, that they're, and so I think just like being the provider, there's this weight, there's this stewardship, and there's this like, it's a real thing, Well,
there are many examples. You look around and you find people that don't take it seriously.
Cautionary tales.
And and I think, wow, they should just get a second job. There are ways to solve this, but they just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, it's just not working.
Yeah, it's that unique balance. And Matt Eyring worked with us. He was an executive at Vivint. And I remember he was speaking to a group and he was talking about this principle of balance. And he was saying, I just have never experienced balance. I kind of see it as an airplane. And sometimes this wing is too high and this wing's too high. And it's kind of basically saying, like, you need to have direction and you need to know that generally this is where I'm going and make the course corrections as best you can. But I've found that there's, I've never had balance in my life. I've had extreme imbalance.
I think that's common,
but I wonder if it's requisite.
I think part of it is when Louise and I would speak on panels, almost every panel, someone would say, how did you live a balanced life? And Louise would laugh and I would laugh. And it's like, we never did. It's not possible. But it was interesting. I was given a book And I looked at it and thought, oh my gosh, that's one of my friends that wrote this book. And the guy's name is Rich Christensen. He's a serial entrepreneur. And he had a balanced chapter. And this was only maybe 10 years ago that I read this book. And I sent him a note and I said, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
I feel so much better. It's not rationalization. It's just logical. But he basically said, you have this chart and it's a diagram and you got family in one camp and health in one camp and work in another camp and church. And he said, people seem to have convinced themselves that they need to be at the nexus. They have to be in the center, that all these things have to be equally balanced. He said, that's not my life. He said, I'm in one camp running hard for a period of time, and then I jump to another camp, and then I jump to another camp. He said, I've determined that balance in life is the frequency through which you cross the lines. If I'm 5 years in one box, my life is not balanced, and those other boxes are suffering. Intriguing. He said, but if I do a 6-month all-nighter starting a business, then I will take my family on vacation for 4 weeks, and I will make sure I jump over here. He said, so they might not be equal, but if I can jump those lines and just give it at least the minimum that it needs to sustain itself, then my life is balanced because I will adjust the ratios over time. Yeah. And I just thought, I've crossed the lines many times. That's why I didn't stay in Asia for 3 weeks. I'd come home and spend the weekend and then go back. And I would fly home on a red eye to make it to a kid's football game or wrestling match.
Yeah, that intentionality.
Then I would fly back.
Yeah.
And it also gives your family confidence that your heart's there. You want to be there, but you've got these conflicting responsibilities. And the more you step up and the more pain you take to cross those lines, the more they know, hey, he's doing the best that he can.
I remember I think it was 2012, and I had got some stock in Vivint, and they were selling to Blackstone. And it was the first real time where I'd ever made, real money. I'd made a good income along the way, but it was a liquidity event. It was kind of my first real kind of liquidity event. And I remember at the time that Todd Santiago, he was the CEO of 2GIG, which was an equipment manufacturer that, was kind of jointly owned by the Vivint ownership. And I was on a plane with him, and I was kind of asking him those questions. It was a bit of like an early midlife crisis. I was 28 years old, but it was kind of the first time where up until that point, it had just been desperation work. I just to survive and to get ahead and to take care of my family, and kind of with that fear of I'm not going to be able to do it, and so just really wanting to overwork to make sure my family is taken care of. And I remember asking him, and he gave me this book by Clayton Christensen, who's now passed away, and it was How Will You Measure Life? Mm-hmm. I know Clayton Christensen was, the person that, was a leader that you would respected and things like that. But he had this way to think about values and balance that I'd never thought about before. And it changed my life. I remember going through reading it, and he was talking about values, and he basically defined it as you value where you spend your time, money, and energy. Mm-hmm. And I went through and I listed all of my perceived values, everything that I should value. And then I put that, the criteria of time, money, and energy. And I realized I had like major holes in my life. It was actually really scary. To see like, hey, I say I value my relationship with my dad. I haven't called my dad in a month, and I haven't spent any meaningful time with him, and I haven't invested any financial resources in that relationship. And I remember making a decision. I said, I am going to call him. When I travel all the time. When I travel to Boston, I'm going to fly him out, and we're going to go to a Red Sox game, and we're going to go spend this time. And we did that for a decade. And that was one of a bunch of examples of kind of course corrections where I said, I want to be integrated. If I say I value this, I want to actually put time, money, and energy around these things. But I have friends that are tilted in the other direction where they don't work enough. They should be working more. Mm-hmm. They spend too much time with the family and not enough time at the office, and end up creating kind of crisis for themselves on the home front and some of these things. And so, it's so hard because it's an art. It's not a science.
It is an art, and it's different for everyone. And that's the thing. I had one dear friend who struggled, and called me up and he said, "Hey, can I borrow 10 grand? I got this problem. My car's broken down. I got to do these major repairs." And so I'd kind of lent him some money here and there, knowing I'm never going to get it back. This is more of a gift for someone I care about. And finally I get this one call and it was like, "I need 50 grand. It's like, holy cow, what have you done? Why is this so much money? And I said, "I need to give you some advice." And I would give the same advice to my children. I said, "You need to work harder." I said, "You have a financial problem because you don't dedicate enough of your free time to solving your problem." And I said, "So I'll make you a deal." I said, "I know it bothers you when I ask why you need the money and I interview you. But I said, I'll just make you a deal. You call me, you ask me for anything up to 50 grand, and I will send it to you if you can answer one question correctly." So what's that? And I said, "I'm going to ask you, how many hours did you work this week? And if you work more hours than me, I will send the money, no questions asked. If you work less than me, I will say, try again next time. Go work harder." And he called me. "How many hours you work?" He said, 38. I said, "I worked 82. Good luck next time." And he called me again. He's up to 46. And then he called me. He was up to 50. But he never once got the money under that new rule. And a year went by. And I called him. I said, I feel so bad. We don't talk anymore. Did I offend you?" And he said, "No." He said, I realized I mostly called you to ask for money. And when I finally got committed that I was going to finally beat you, that you were going to send me that money, I found I didn't need any money because I made enough on my own that it solved my problem." I said, that's all I was trying to get across. This is within your power. And I think sometimes people lose sight of that. You're trading comfort, or you're trading, lack of bills for watching TV or going to the movies or playing on the local softball team. It's all about balance, and you just kind of have to figure it out. But we do have obligations.
Yeah.
And I always put my family obligation to be front and center. And I figured I'd do whatever I needed to for them.
I think about my life today versus my life when I was like 17, 18, 21, 22. I don't watch TV ever. And it's not that I don't love it. I love it. Like if I can, like a great day, Saturday for me to be watching football from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Like that'd be like a great, and if I get indulgent, I'll get a Saturday where I don't have anything on the agenda. When I was 17, that's all I did.
Right.
And I think about the waste, and I think a lot of it has come with, I know what's important in my life, and there's trade-offs. And like good is the enemy to great. And there's some of these things that it's just like, I don't have enough hours in the day for the things.
Something's got to give, right?
Something's got to give.
People always tease me that I'm such a bad golfer. Well, that's just because if you're gone all week and you're tied up all Sunday and the only day to golf is Saturday and it burns half the day.
Trade-off.
What was more important? Did I need to spend time with my kids and going to all their games, or going out and playing golf? And so I just never made time for it to become good at it.
But I think that awareness of just like actually looking at your schedule and saying, where am I spending my time? And where am I spending my money? And where am I spending my energy?
And does it match your priorities? Just like your example with your dad.
Does it line up?
I need to restructure this because I'm not paying attention to the most high priorities.
Yeah.
It's kind of the good, better, best.
Even my relationship with, you're talking about your kids and, your wife. At that point, like I always had this mentality that like I can sacrifice today so that I have the time in the future. I'm going to give up today. And I just realized like some costs are too expensive.
Yeah.
And I need to like just build in that time.
I mean, you blink your eyes and you're 60 years old and it's it gets extreme. And that's what a good spouse does. That's what good friends.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a couple of friends that kind of shook me and say, you're going too hard. You need to spend more time on these other things. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're right. I will do that.
So. I've said this a bunch. The older I get, I find myself getting more spiritual and less religious. I'm probably less dogmatic and just more loving.
Yeah.
How has God, how has spirituality, how has that philosophy influenced the journey? I know faith is something that's been really important to your entire life, and Luis, and, but how does that factor? How does it, fit?
Yeah. Theology aside, I think for me, the importance of religion and those things it helps me frame a life that I can actively participate in and feel good about and feel like, okay, this life that I was given was worthwhile. And I've found that the more I'm reaching out instead of focusing on my own problems, the more I'm focusing on other people's problems. And I have a real soft spot in my heart for people who are really doing as much as they can do, and life still is hard.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's not difficult for me to hire someone that I know needs some work and have them work in my yard and pay them to solve that problem. It's not difficult for me to see a family that's really, really struggling and to help pay the rent. I mean, it gives me satisfaction because when I mentioned that time that we started giving away all of our salary, we started to think much more outwardly, and we started to say, what are the problems that we can solve because we've been blessed with resources that it's hard to argue that you deserve them. I mean, there are far more smarter people out there and people that work harder, and we have far more than many of them. And so it's like, do we have a stewardship? Do we have an obligation? Yeah. And we felt we did. And so as we became more sensitive to those things, we found even more opportunities. And truly some of the richest experience in our life, and some of the times where I felt God's presence in my life the most, was when we were doing that outreach and solving problems.
But you're pretty connected. Like, it feels like you kind of are guided a lot. Like you lead with your heart. You see certain leaders that are like non-emotional, they just kind of, it's all logic, where for you, it feels like you tap into something bigger than yourself. It feels, I've just heard enough experiences of like, hey, go talk to this person. Go talk to this person and do this. And like, has that always been that way? Have you always kind of felt like you were guided and kind of had,
It probably has, but I was probably oblivious to it at points in my life because I was too selfish. As I have tried to be less selfish, and as I've done more, I feel like I get those promptings more frequently. And it could be as simple as God saying, I need help with this. You responded the last time, I'm going to give you another try. And when I've responded to those feelings and promptings, I've always had a good experience. And
but you get like clear ones. Like I know sometimes. I know like some people are like, but like I've heard stories that's like, hey, go do this. And you just kind of like, you know that this is what I need to go do.
Yeah. Well, and you get feedback loops. And so there are times where you hear the whole story and you realize I was a part in a play, in a plan. And you know what? To me, just like when my wife said, I just have complete confidence in you. I feel the same way, where if I feel a prompting, I do it. Everything plays out. Whether you're worried about whether you were just being nice or whether you were following a prompting, given the outcomes, it just is like, okay, feels like heaven might trust me also. And I have a reason to continue to step forward and try to do those things. And so that's kind of where religion is so involved in my day-to-day life.
Have you like worked it out and said, hey, this is what I believe? Or is it just something you've accumulated over time? Like, have you said like,
my parents were that way. And so I had that good example. And as I've exercised it in my own life, I've felt that kind of positive feedback and reinforcement that, yeah, there is more I can do. There are things that, that I'm intended to do.
Yeah.
I'm expected to do.
I've heard you reference stewardship a number of times. What does stewardship mean to you?
We've been blessed with a lot of resources. They're not mine. They've been entrusted to me, and there's an expectation that I will do good with them. And so I look at it and I say, well, all right, so you make $1 million. You can go out and spend $1 million and have a lot of fun, or do we spend $25 and go out and have reasonable fun, and then we help with scholarships and we help send the kids to college, or we help feed the needy, or we help support, the Indian school that we back and all these other things. And it's just been what's fair and appropriate for my consumption and what is fair and appropriate to use to serve others. And there's no right or wrong answer. Everyone's different.
No, everyone is different. It's so, it is different, but I have the people in my life that kind of inspire me the most are the most abundant. They're the most giving. I mean, that's
Me too.
who I'm drawn to. That's who I aspire to be like. And you fall into that category. I mean, you've lived like this abundant life. There's one story that I want you to retell because you told it to me and I just got goosebumps. Talk about when you retired from PA and kind of the meeting with your team when you talked to them about what that merger meant, specifically around scholarships and specifically around kind of what it would mean to the people who built the company with you.
Sure.
And what your motivation was.
Well, it was obvious that there would be a very positive outcome for many, many people with this merger. And I calculated that we'd have like 85 millionaire families. And that's just a wonderful thing for all of these families to experience some level of financial independence. But that was only about half the company. And we had lots and lots of people who do a great job for us. They're committed. They're friends. Many of them I had hired. And I didn't want people to feel like this outcome is concentrated, that everyone didn't win. What most people see is risk. They see, do I have job stability? Might this cause me to lose my job? What are all of the risks that I'm going to see? Because change
happens and it's inevitable.
And it's hard to figure everything out. And so we tried to structure a deal that gave people hope and confidence in the future. But Louise and I wanted to do something special. And so we went ahead and set up a scholarship fund, and we donated a pretty significant piece of our stock that we were going to tender into the merger to fund it. And so it was a wonderful thing that Louise and I got to basically announce to all of our firm and say, for all of you who don't own stock, who didn't get this big bump that some of the others in the firm did, we just want to show our love and appreciation. And so we've set up a scholarship fund, and we're going to help send all your kids to college. And we said, there's limits. We can't afford to send all your kids to Harvard. Didn't send my own kids to Harvard. But we're going to allocate $40,000 for each one of your children. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to make this burden that we know you think about. And some of you think about it every day, that we're going to take that burden off as our way of saying we love you and appreciate you.
And it wasn't like, if I have one kid, it's one per
family. No, he said every kid you brought into the company, every kid you have while you work here. And so we've basically prepared for about 300 scholarships.
Who had the most kids?
Oh, we've got kids. We have some people that have 4 kids. I cut 6 scholarship checks this year.
That's so great.
Because some of the kids were already in college.
No, it's so special. You got to be so proud. Like every time you do that,
feels good every time.
You've got to just feel so proud. And I think when you talk about legacy, your legacy lives beyond you. That's when you're dead and gone, your legacy continues to live on. And this is a legacy type thing. I mean, it's changing families and generations of families. My parents didn't graduate from college. I didn't graduate from college. And I think just that experience of graduating, I think a lot of the reason education was so important to you was because your dad.
It opened doors.
Yeah, it was so important to your dad. And so it kind of goes from kid to kid, and the opposite's true. And so anyway, so special. You're going back and you're giving advice to 21-year-old Brian Murphy. What would you tell Brian Murphy? Being where you're at in your shoes today, what advice would you go give yourself if you were starting it all over?
I would probably say, be willing to take a little bit more risk. I played it really conservatively for a long time.
It's just so crazy because from the outside, people would say, man, you took tremendous risk at all these steps, but you feel like they were.
Yeah, I would have said, have more confidence in yourself that you can tolerate a little bit more risk, and you might have grown faster. Don't travel so much. Figure out how to grow this business without having to lead so hard and aggressively from the front. I just always felt like it's easier for me to ask people to do hard things if they know that I'm already doing those hard things. Maybe that's have more confidence in the people that you work with, that they can step up and do that without having to see that example. And, just smell the roses more It was kind of like you're saying, I'm going to sacrifice now because I'm going to prepare for the future. Life goes by very fast. There aren't many things I would change in my life, but I do tease my Utah friends that they play a lot harder than my Connecticut friends.
Yeah.
They enjoy their life more, and life's not quite built. It was interesting you mentioned Clayton Christensen. I met Clayton multiple times, and he was a wonderful example, just an incredible thought leader. And I read his book, and shortly after I read his book, I dreamed that I had died, and I was watching my own funeral. And I thought, okay, is this the legacy? How is it that you're going to be remembered? So how do you measure success? And I remember one of my sons was basically giving the talk, and he said, I would like to do something here. If my dad paid for your college or sent one of your kids to college, please stand up. If my parents took you on vacation and paid your way to go on vacation, please stand up. If they helped you financially in any way, please stand up. If they just gave you free advice because you had troubles or issues and you needed to come to the house or them to come to your house, what impact did you have? And, many in the congregation were standing. And I said, okay, that's a good measurement. That's who I need to be. And that was probably 10 years ago. I'm still working on it.
I mean, we've experienced that. I mean, this is 3 to 5 years ago. You believing in us and giving us time. And, my partner, Dave, he just reveres you and your family. And, you were that leader to him that believed in him more than he believed in himself. I mean, if you go back and talk to Dave, he's like, I wasn't a finance person. I had no business being in finance. I'm a baseball player. I'm, professional athlete, kind of trying to go back and get, my education. I had if I wouldn't have had Brian that bet on me and believed in me and held my hand, I never would have had the career. And I think it's just countless, that there's a Tim McGraw song right now where he talks about kind of standing room only at your funeral. And that's kind of the life.
It's a little bit of a corny way of looking at it, but I think it measures the things that I'm trying to measure. And I am not where I am if it wasn't for others. And I love to see people win. I don't feel that competition. I love to cheer for people, and, watching Dave's success, your success, it makes me feel good. And it doesn't diminish me in any way.
Your life fires me up because you live a life of abundance. You experience a lot of abundance in your life because of it. I think you give and you get.
We've been blessed,
abundantly, but I think it starts with the giving, both with your time and with your energy and with your knowledge and with your expertise. And this is just me speaking to you, man to man. I think your best years are in the future and not in the past. I think your biggest contribution and your biggest impact is going to be in the years to come. And, there's chapters in our life. Every step, every chapter of the book's so beautiful and required, and there's times and seasons for everything. But I personally can't wait to just have kind of a seat to be able to watch the impact that you go make over the next decade to 2 to 3 decades, and kind of what you do with all the knowledge and the wisdom and the resources and the time that you have now. And so anyway, I feel honored to have you on here. I can't wait to share your story. Look forward to getting you back. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today with you, Casey.